My name is Alex, and I'm what you might call outdoorsy, though mostly in theory. I love the idea of nature, the crisp air, the towering trees, the escape from the constant buzz of city life. But I'm also a creature of comfort, used to my Wi-Fi and readily available takeout. So, when my friend, Liam, suggested a week-long cabin trip in the Appalachian Mountains, I was hesitant. Liam, on the other hand, is a genuine mountain man. He practically lives in hiking boots. He convinced me by promising a rustic but comfortable cabin, complete with limited electricity and spotty cell service. What really sealed the deal, though, was the price. Liam's uncle owned the cabin and was letting us use it for practically nothing, a perk of Liam's semi-annual maintenance checks on the property. He just handed a paper to me with some scribbled writing and told me, almost dismissively, just some guidelines. Uncle's a bit eccentric. I should have paid more attention. I really should have. The guidelines were a list of rules, specifically for the hours between 11:15 p.m. and 3:33 a.m. It sounded like the start of a bad joke or some kind of elaborate prank. It wasn't. We arrived at the cabin late afternoon, the drive having been far more arduous than Liam had let on. The rustic description was accurate, if you generously interpreted rustic to mean borderline dilapidated. The cabin was a single, large room with a lofted sleeping area, a tiny kitchenette, and a bathroom that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. Still, it was charming in its own way, nestled deep in a thicket of trees, with the sounds of a nearby creek providing a constant, soothing background hum. The air was unbelievably clean, and the silence, once you got used to it, was almost profound. Liam immediately set about doing his maintenance, which mostly involved checking the generator, inspecting the wood-burning stove, and making sure the water pump was functioning. I, meanwhile, unpacked and tried to find a cell signal, with limited success. As dusk settled, we built a fire in the fire pit outside, cooked some hot dogs, and roasted marshmallows. It was idyllic, exactly the kind of escape I'd been craving. We talked about everything and nothing, the way old friends do, the conversation punctuated by the crackling fire and the chirping of crickets. Around 10:30 p.m., Liam yawned widely. "All right, man, I'm hitting the hay. Early start tomorrow. Gonna try and find that old hiking trail Uncle Joe was talking about." I nodded, feeling tired myself. "Sounds good. I'll probably turn in soon, too." Liam climbed the ladder to the loft, and I sat by the fire a little longer, enjoying the quiet solitude. It was then that I remembered the paper Liam had given me. I dug it out of my backpack. It was a single sheet of lined paper, folded in half, with the title, Nighttime Protocols, written in a shaky, almost childlike hand. Below that were the rules. Rule 1. Between 11:15 p.m. and 3:33 a.m., do not, under any circumstances, leave the cabin. Rule 2. Keep the curtains drawn and all windows shut tight. Rule 3. If you hear knocking on the door or windows, do not answer. Do not acknowledge it in any way. Rule 4. If you hear scratching sounds, cover your ears and hum a familiar tune until it stops. Rule 5. Do not look directly at the woods after 11:15 p.m. Rule 6. If the lights flicker, do not use any other source of light. Remain in darkness. Rule 7. If you hear a voice calling your name, do not respond. It is not who you think it is. Rule 8. If you feel a sudden drop in temperature, wrap yourself in a blanket and do not move until it passes. Rule 9. Do not speak above a whisper. Rule 10. If you see something in the cabin that wasn't there before, do not touch it. Pretend it doesn't exist. I reread the list, a shiver crawling down my spine despite the warm embers of the dying fire. It was absurd, obviously. right? Liam's uncle was probably just a lonely old man with an overactive imagination. Still, the isolation of the cabin, the deepening darkness, and the sheer strangeness of the rules started to get to me. I glanced at my watch. 11:05 p.m. I decided to head inside. I carefully extinguished the fire, double-checked that the cabin door was locked, and drew the curtains, as instructed. I even checked the windows, making sure they were latched. A part of me felt ridiculous, indulging in this charade, but another part, a primal, instinctive part, felt a growing sense of unease. I went to the bathroom, brushed my teeth, keeping my voice to a whisper when I hummed a tune, just in case, and climbed into the bottom bunk, leaving the loft to Liam, who was already snoring softly. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the night. The wind rustling through the trees, the distant hoot of an owl, the gentle creaking of the cabin settling. My watch ticked over to 11:15 p.m., and that's when the silence started to feel different, heavier, more expectant. I was starting to truly freak out when I heard it for the first time. A gentle, almost hesitant knocking on the front door. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Rule number 3, do not answer. Do not acknowledge it in any way. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it to stop. It was louder this time, more insistent. I pulled the blanket tighter around me, my breath catching in my throat. I could hear Liam shifting in the loft above me, but he didn't wake up. He was a heavy sleeper, thankfully. Or maybe not so thankfully. The knocking was now accompanied by a faint scratching sound, like nails dragging across the wood. Rule number 4, cover your ears and hum a familiar tune until it stops. I clamped my hands over my ears and started humming Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, the first tune that popped into my head. My voice was shaky and barely audible, even to myself. The knocking and scratching continued for what felt like an eternity, a relentless assault on my senses. I kept humming, my eyes squeezed shut, my body trembling. Finally, after several agonizing minutes, it stopped. The silence that followed was almost as terrifying as the noise. I slowly lowered my hands, my ears ringing. I lay there, rigid with fear, listening for any sign that it might return. The only sound was the frantic beating of my own heart. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. I lay in the bottom bunk, every muscle tense, listening for any recurrence of the knocking or scratching. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what had just happened. It was probably just an animal, right? A raccoon, maybe, or a deer bumping against the cabin. But the deliberate nature of the knocking, the way it had escalated, felt intentional. And the scratching. That was harder to explain away. I glanced at my watch. 11:48 p.m., still a long way to go until 3:33 a.m. I remembered rule number 5. Do not look directly at the woods after 11:15 p.m. I had already broken the first part of rule 3, technically, by acknowledging the knocking existed in my mind. I was terrified of breaking any more, even though the rational part of my brain screamed that it was all nonsense. The cabin felt colder now, a noticeable drop in temperature despite the lingering warmth from the earlier fire. Rule number 8. If you feel a sudden drop in temperature, wrap yourself in a blanket and do not move until it passes. I was already wrapped in a blanket, but I pulled it tighter, burrowing deeper into the thin mattress. I tried to focus on my breathing, slow and steady, to calm my racing heart. Then I heard it. A voice. Faint, almost a whisper, seemingly coming from just outside the window near my head. Alex. My blood ran cold. Rule number 7. If you hear a voice calling your name, do not respond. It is not who you think it is. The voice sounded familiar, like my mother's, but distorted somehow, with an underlying current of something else, something cold and hollow. "Alex, let me in." The voice was more insistent now, laced with a pleading quality that tugged at my heartstrings. My mother lived hundreds of miles away. It couldn't be her. It couldn't. But the voice sounded so much like her. I squeezed my eyes shut tighter, my hands clenching into fists. I wanted to scream, to yell at it to go away. But I remembered rule number 9. Do not speak above a whisper. I bit my lip, hard, drawing blood, the metallic taste filling my mouth. The voice continued, weaving its way into my consciousness, playing on my deepest fears and anxieties. "Alex, I'm cold. I'm scared. Please." It was getting harder and harder to resist. The voice was so close, so real. I started to doubt myself. What if it was my mother? What if something terrible had happened, and she had somehow found her way here? The thought was absurd, irrational, but the voice was chipping away at my resolve. Suddenly, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then went out completely. The cabin plunged into absolute darkness. Rule number 6. If the lights flicker, do not use any other source of light. Remain in darkness. I had a small flashlight in my backpack, just a few feet away, but I didn't dare reach for it. The darkness was oppressive, absolute, broken only by the faintest sliver of moonlight, filtering through a gap in the curtains. The voice stopped the moment the lights went out. The silence that returned was even more profound than before. A heavy, expectant silence that pressed down on me like a physical weight. I lay there, paralyzed with fear, my senses on high alert. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, the frantic thumping of my heart, the shallow, ragged breaths I was taking. Then, I saw it. A faint, flickering light, moving slowly through the trees outside the window. It was small, like a candle flame, but it seemed to pulse with an unnatural, ethereal glow. I knew, instinctively, that I shouldn't be looking at it. Rule number 5 again. But I couldn't tear my eyes away. The light seemed to beckon me, to draw me in. It moved closer, gliding through the trees with an unnerving grace. As it approached the window, I realized it wasn't a candle flame at all. It was a shape, a figure shrouded in darkness, with the faint, flickering light emanating from within. I couldn't make out any details, but I could sense its presence, its cold, watchful gaze. I squeezed my eyes shut, finally breaking my horrified stare, and buried my face in the pillow, whimpering softly. I don't know how long I stayed like that, lost in a vortex of terror, but it felt like an eternity. When I finally dared to open my eyes again, the light was gone. The cabin was still dark, but the oppressive silence had lifted slightly. I could hear the familiar sounds of the night again. The wind, the creaking of the cabin. My watch glowed in the darkness. 1:17 a.m., still hours to go. And I was already completely, utterly terrified. The lingering fear from the light and the voice made it impossible to relax. Even though the immediate threats seemed to have passed, the anticipation of what might come next was almost worse. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of leaves outside, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I was acutely aware of every inch of my body, the clammy sweat on my skin, the tremor in my hands, the tightness in my chest. I tried to focus on the rules, clinging to them as a lifeline in the sea of terror. They were the only thing that made any sense, even if the sense they made was terrifying. I replayed them in my head, over and over, trying to anticipate any potential triggers. Then, I noticed something different. A smell. Faint at first, but growing stronger. It was a sweet, sickly smell. like rotting flowers and overripe fruit. It was vaguely familiar, but I couldn't quite place it, and it was definitely not a smell that belonged in a cabin in the woods. I sniffed the air cautiously, trying to pinpoint the source. It seemed to be coming from everywhere. The smell intensified, becoming cloying and overwhelming, filling my nostrils and coating the back of my throat. It was a smell of decay, of something ancient and wrong. I didn't see anything on the rules list mentioning strange smells. This was new. This was unaccounted for. My carefully constructed wall of admittedly flimsy security, built on the foundation of the rules, began to crumble. Panic started to set in again, a cold wave washing over me. The smell grew so intense that I started to gag. I covered my mouth and nose with the blanket, trying to filter it out, but it was no use. It permeated everything. I felt nauseous, my stomach churning. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the sensory overload. Then, I heard a noise, a soft, slithering sound, coming from the corner of the cabin, near the kitchenette. It was a slow, deliberate sound, like something heavy being dragged across the wooden floor. I held my breath, listening intently. The slithering sound continued, getting closer. My heart hammered against my ribs. I desperately wanted to look, to see what was making the noise, but I was paralyzed by fear. The smell, the sound, the darkness. It was all too much. The slithering stopped. I strained my ears, listening for any sign of movement. The silence was deafening, broken only by the pounding of my heart. Then I felt it. A slight pressure on the edge of my bunk, as if something had brushed against it. I flinched, my body jerking involuntarily. I squeezed my eyes shut even tighter, my teeth clenched, every muscle in my body rigid with terror. I felt another pressure, this time on my foot, through the blanket. A cold, smooth pressure. It lingered for a moment, then slowly, deliberately, moved up my leg. I wanted to scream, to kick, to run, but I was frozen in place, trapped by the invisible force of my own fear. The pressure continued its agonizingly slow ascent, moving up my thigh, across my stomach, towards my chest. I could feel my breathing becoming shallow and rapid, bordering on hyperventilation. I was on the verge of passing out, my head swimming. The sweet, sickly smell was overwhelming, making me feel dizzy and disoriented. The pressure reached my chest and stopped. I held my breath, waiting, anticipating. What? I didn't know. I just knew it was something terrible. Then I felt a faint breath on my face, a cold, damp breath, carrying the same putrid smell. It was so close, I could almost feel the presence of whatever was hovering over me. I whimpered, a low, guttural sound that escaped my lips despite my efforts to remain silent. The pressure on my chest increased, a heavy weight that made it difficult to breathe. I felt something cold and smooth brush against my cheek. It lingered there for a moment, then slowly, deliberately, moved towards my ear. And then I heard a whisper, a voice so low and guttural it was barely audible, right next to my ear. "We see you." It was not the voice from before. This voice was different, deeper, raspier, filled with a chilling malice. My mind snapped. I couldn't take it anymore. I screamed, a long, loud, blood-curdling scream that ripped through the silence of the cabin. I thrashed wildly, kicking and flailing, trying to dislodge whatever was on top of me. My scream echoed in the small cabin, bouncing off the wooden walls and fading into the stillness of the night. I lay there, gasping for breath, my body trembling uncontrollably. The sudden release of tension left me weak and disoriented. I had broken rule number 9, spectacularly. Do not speak above a whisper. The consequences of that transgression, I had no idea. but the immediate relief of breaking free from whatever had been pressing down on me was overwhelming. Slowly, cautiously, I opened my eyes. The cabin was still dark, but my eyes had adjusted enough to make out the vague outlines of the furniture. There was nothing on top of me, nothing near me. I sat up slowly, my muscles aching, every nerve ending on high alert. The sickly sweet smell was fading, but it still lingered in the air, a faint reminder of the horror I had just experienced. I listened intently, straining to hear any sound beyond the frantic beating of my own heart. The silence was complete, unnaturally so. Even the usual night sounds of the forest seemed to have been muted. It was as if the entire world was holding its breath, waiting. I reached for my watch, my hand shaking. 2:03 a.m. Still over an hour and a half until 3:33 a.m. An eternity. I had to do something. I couldn't just lie there, waiting for the next horror to unfold. I needed to regain some semblance of control, however small. I remembered the flashlight in my backpack. I had been too afraid to use it earlier, when the lights went out, adhering to rule number 6. But the rules seemed to be shifting, evolving, or maybe I was just past caring. I needed light. I swung my legs over the side of the bunk, my feet hitting the cold wooden floor. I moved slowly, deliberately, trying to make as little noise as possible. I reached for my backpack, which was leaning against the wall near the foot of the bed. As I grabbed the backpack, I heard a noise, a faint, rustling sound coming from the loft above me. Liam. Relief washed over me, so intense it almost brought me to my knees. I wasn't alone. Liam was here. He could help me. He could tell me I was just being paranoid, that it was all just a bad dream. "Liam?" I whispered, my voice hoarse and shaky. The rustling stopped. There was a moment of silence, then a slow, creaking sound, as if someone was shifting their weight. "Liam?" I whispered again, a little louder this time. Then, I heard a voice. But it wasn't Liam's. It was the same guttural voice that had whispered in my ear earlier. The one that had said, "We see you." "Alex," the voice whispered from the loft, a chilling imitation of Liam's tone, but laced with that same underlying malice. "Come up here." I froze, my blood turning to ice. It was using Liam's voice, mimicking him, trying to lure me. "We have something to show you," the voice continued, its tone shifting, becoming more seductive, more persuasive. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I could not go up there. Whatever was in the loft was not Liam. It was something else. Something evil. I fumbled with the zipper of my backpack, my fingers clumsy and uncoordinated. I finally managed to open it and pull out the flashlight. I switched it on, my hand shaking so violently that the beam of light danced erratically around the cabin. I pointed the flashlight towards the loft. The ladder leading up was empty. The loft itself was shrouded in shadow, the beam of light not strong enough to penetrate the darkness completely. "Come on, Alex. Don't be afraid," the voice whispered, its tone now tinged with impatience. I took a step back, away from the ladder, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed to get out of the cabin. I needed to escape. The rules, the voice, the thing in the loft. It was all too much. I turned and stumbled towards the door, my hand still clutching the flashlight. I reached for the doorknob, my fingers fumbling with the cold metal. Then, I heard a loud thud from the loft, as if something heavy had jumped down. I didn't look back. I yanked the door open and ran. I burst out of the cabin and into the cold night air, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly as I ran. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. Away from the cabin, away from the voice, away from whatever was lurking in the loft. I stumbled through the darkness, the trees looming around me like menacing figures. I could hear the sound of my own ragged breathing, the pounding of my heart, and the rustling of leaves under my feet. I didn't dare look back, terrified of what I might see. I ran blindly, following a faint path that I hoped would lead me away from the creek and towards the road, however distant it might be. The cold air stung my lungs, but I didn't stop. Fear propelled me forward, a primal instinct to survive. The woods seemed to press in on me, the darkness alive with unseen things. I imagined eyes watching me from the shadows, heard whispers in the rustling leaves. Every snap of a twig, every hoot of an owl sent a jolt of terror through me. I tripped over a root, sprawling onto the ground, the flashlight flying from my hand. I scrambled to my feet, my hands scraped and bleeding, my heart pounding like a drum. I groped blindly for the flashlight, my fingers brushing against cold leaves and damp earth. Finally, my hand closed around the flashlight. I grabbed it and switched it back on, the beam of light cutting through the darkness. I shone it around me, frantically searching for any sign of pursuit. Then, I saw it. Standing at the edge of the trees, just beyond the reach of the flashlight beam, was a figure. Tall and gaunt, shrouded in darkness, its features obscured. It was the same figure I had seen earlier, the one with the flickering light. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching me, silent and menacing. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I was trapped, caught in the beam of my own flashlight, like a deer in headlights. The figure slowly raised a hand, its long skeletal fingers pointing towards me. And then, I heard the voice again, the guttural whisper, echoing through the trees. "You cannot escape." The voice seemed to come from all around me, surrounding me, suffocating me. I felt a wave of despair wash over me, a sense of utter hopelessness. I knew I was going to die. I closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable, waiting for the darkness to consume me. But nothing happened. I waited, my body trembling, my mind numb with terror. The silence stretched on, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. Slowly, cautiously, I opened my eyes. The figure was gone. I shone the flashlight around me, frantically searching the trees. There was nothing there, just the darkness and the silence. I didn't understand. Why had it spared me? What did it want? I didn't have time to ponder the questions. I needed to keep moving. I needed to get away. I started running again, faster this time, my lungs burning, my legs aching. I ran until I couldn't run anymore, until I collapsed onto the ground, exhausted and terrified. I lay there, gasping for breath, my body shaking uncontrollably. I looked up at the sky, the faint glimmer of stars barely visible through the thick canopy of trees. I glanced at my watch. 2:57 a.m., only a little more than half an hour left. If I could just survive until 3:33 a.m., maybe, just maybe, I would be safe. But even as I thought that, I knew it wasn't true. I knew that whatever was out there, whatever was hunting me, wouldn't simply disappear when the clock struck 3:33. I was trapped in a nightmare with no escape. I burst out of the cabin and into the cold night air, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly as I ran. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. Away from the cabin, away from the voice, away from whatever was lurking in the loft. I stumbled through the darkness, the trees looming around me like menacing figures. I could hear the sound of my own ragged breathing, the pounding of my heart, and the rustling of leaves under my feet. I didn't dare look back, terrified of what I might see. I ran blindly, following a faint path that I hoped would lead me away from the creek and towards the road, however distant it might be. The cold air stung my lungs, but I didn't stop. Fear propelled me forward, a primal instinct to survive. The woods seemed to press in on me, the darkness alive with unseen things. I imagined eyes watching me from the shadows, heard whispers in the rustling leaves. Every snap of a twig, every hoot of an owl, sent a jolt of terror through me. I tripped over a root, sprawling onto the ground, the flashlight flying from my hand. I scrambled to my feet, my hands scraped and bleeding, my heart pounding like a drum. I groped blindly for the flashlight, my fingers brushing against cold leaves and damp earth. Finally, my hand closed around the flashlight. I grabbed it and switched it back on, the beam of light cutting through the darkness. I shone it around me, frantically searching for any sign of pursuit. Then, I saw it. Standing at the edge of the trees, just beyond the reach of the flashlight beam, was a figure. Tall and gaunt, shrouded in darkness, its features obscured. It was the same figure I had seen earlier, the one with the flickering light. It didn't move. It just stood there watching me, silent and menacing. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I was trapped, caught in the beam of my own flashlight, like a deer in headlights. The figure slowly raised a hand, its long, skeletal fingers pointing towards me. And then, I heard the voice again, the guttural whisper echoing through the trees. "You cannot escape." The voice seemed to come from all around me, surrounding me, suffocating me. I felt a wave of despair wash over me, a sense of utter hopelessness. I knew I was going to die. I closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable, waiting for the darkness to consume me. But nothing happened. I waited, my body trembling, my mind numb with terror. The silence stretched on, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. Slowly, cautiously, I opened my eyes. The figure was gone. I shone the flashlight around me, frantically searching the trees. There was nothing there, just the darkness and the silence. I didn't understand. Why had it spared me? What did it want? I didn't have time to ponder the questions. I needed to keep moving. I needed to get away. I started running again, faster this time, my lungs burning, my legs aching. I ran until I couldn't run anymore, until I collapsed onto the ground, exhausted and terrified. I lay there gasping for breath, my body shaking uncontrollably. I looked up at the sky, the faint glimmer of stars barely visible through the thick canopy of trees. I glanced at my watch, 2:57 a.m., only a little more than half an hour left. If I could just survive until 3:33 a.m., maybe, just maybe, I would be safe. But even as I thought that, I knew it wasn't true. I knew that whatever was out there, whatever was hunting me, wouldn't simply disappear when the clock struck 3:33. I was trapped in a nightmare with no escape. The whisper hung in the air, a chilling promise that sent shivers down my spine. The pressure on my chest remained, a heavy weight that made it difficult to breathe. I was paralyzed with terror, trapped in the claustrophobic darkness of the tree hollow, completely at the mercy of whatever was outside. Then, the scratching started again. But this time, it wasn't on the outside of the tree. It was inside the hollow, right next to me. I flinched, my body recoiling from the sound. I could feel the vibrations through the wood, the sharp claws scraping against the bark, getting closer and closer. I squeezed my eyes shut, tears streaming down my face. I knew it was pointless to resist, to try and escape. There was nowhere to go. The scratching stopped, and I felt something brush against my hand, something cold and smooth, like a snake. It slithered up my arm, slowly, deliberately, its touch sending icy tendrils of fear through my veins. I wanted to scream, to cry out, but I couldn't. I was too terrified to make a sound. I could only lie there, trembling, waiting for the inevitable. The cold, smooth thing reached my neck and coiled around it. It tightened, slowly, constricting my breathing. I gasped for air, my lungs burning, my head swimming. I felt a sharp pain in my neck, like a needle pricking my skin. Then another and another. I realized with a sickening horror that it was biting me. The pain intensified, spreading through my body like wildfire. I felt a strange sensation, a tingling numbness that started in my neck and spread outwards, engulfing me. My vision blurred, my senses dulled. I could hear the voice, the guttural whisper, but it sounded distant now, muffled, as if I was underwater. "Sleep," the voice whispered. "Sleep and dream." I felt myself slipping away, losing consciousness. The darkness closed in, a welcome oblivion that promised an end to the terror. But even as I lost consciousness, I knew it wasn't over. It was just beginning. I had a dream. A vivid, terrifying dream. I was back in the cabin, but it was different. It was twisted, distorted, like a funhouse mirror reflection of reality. The walls were warped, the furniture contorted, the air thick with a suffocating darkness. I was standing in the middle of the room, and I was surrounded by figures, tall, gaunt figures, shrouded in shadow, their faces obscured. They were the same figures I had seen in the woods, the ones with the flickering lights. They were all pointing at me, their long, skeletal fingers accusing, condemning, and they were all whispering, their voices blending together into a chorus of malice. "You broke the rules," they whispered. "You disobeyed. You resisted." I tried to speak, to defend myself, but I couldn't. My voice was gone. I was trapped, helpless, surrounded by my accusers. The figures started to close in, their shadows engulfing me. I felt their cold touch on my skin, their sharp claws digging into my flesh. I screamed, but no sound came out. Then I woke up. I was lying on the ground, outside the tree hollow. The first rays of dawn were filtering through the trees, casting a pale light on the forest floor. I sat up slowly, my body aching, my head throbbing. I felt weak and disoriented, but I was alive. I looked at my watch. 3:35 a.m. The time had passed. I looked around me at the trees, the clearing, the hollow and the oak. Everything looked normal, peaceful even. The whispers were gone. The footsteps were gone. The figures were gone. It was over. But I knew, deep down, that it wasn't really over. I had survived the night, but I had been changed, scarred, forever marked by the horrors I had experienced. I stood up, my legs shaky, and started walking. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to get away from that place, away from the Appalachian Mountains, away from the cabin, away from the rules. I walked until I found the road, and then I walked some more, until I finally saw a car approaching. I flagged it down, and the driver, a kind-looking woman, took one look at me and immediately offered me a ride. I didn't tell her what had happened. I didn't think she would believe me. I just told her I had gotten lost hiking and that I needed to get back to town. I never went back to the Appalachian Mountains. I never saw Liam again. I tried calling him, texting him, emailing him, but I never got a response. It was as if he had vanished off the face of the earth. Part of me worries about him, of course. I wonder if he's okay, if he's still up there in that cabin, following those insane rules. Or worse. But another part of me, a darker, more selfish part, is glad he's gone. Glad that I don't have to face him, to explain what happened, to relive the terror of that night. I still have nightmares, of course. Vivid, terrifying nightmares that leave me screaming and drenched in sweat. I see the figures in the shadows, hear the whispers in the wind. feel the cold touch on my skin. I've tried therapy, medication, everything. Nothing seems to help. The memories are burned into my mind, etched into my soul. I've become obsessed with researching the Appalachian Mountains, trying to find some explanation for what happened to me. I've scoured old maps, folklore archives, local legends,